So I'm the secretary of this organization. If you're not familiar with it, it is the national organization of which Cash is, well, actually the founder, but Cash is a chapter of the Secular Student Alliance, and we're up to something like 360 national affiliates nationwide on campuses for universities and colleges, and we have over 50 high school chapters now too. And if we were at the Reason Rally a couple weeks ago in Washington, D.C., we're even going to start getting into middle schools and junior highs, because we have kids come up to us of that young of age and say, hey, I want a safe space for myself and for my secular friends to congregate and just talk and hang out. And that's incredible. We have never really seen that before. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is that our board elections are coming up on the 28th, so that is 1 week from this Saturday, and I'm up for re-election. So if you were so inclined to vote for me, you would have to become a student member of the SSA. You can go to secularstudents.org/support, and it's only costs $10 for students. You have to be a paid, even though it's a small amount, a paid member to vote. We do have free student memberships, but those are non-voting, so it's a little bit of chunk of change, but I promise it's going to a very good place. And we actually currently have a matching offer up to $150,000 from a couple of our major donors. So every dollar you give to the SSA is matched, unless of course you were giving $200,000 personally, and then that wouldn't work. So I'm going to talk about something that was actually inspired within me roughly a year ago or so. J.T. Eberhard, he is the high school specialist for the Secular Student Alliance, so he coordinates with high school kids who want to form groups and so forth. He came out a while ago with his struggles with anorexia nervosa and now anorexia athletica and depression and so forth. And his public nature of it and his call for more secular folks, like a lot of you, to come out and start talking about it really got me thinking about what exactly the atheist community has that religious communities don't, or things that the religious communities offer people with mental illness that atheists do better. And I'll get into specifics of what things in those categories are and how exactly we do it better. You might recognize this cartoon. It's from the Hyperbole and a Half post on depression. And unfortunately, she's been back and forth and has relapsed. And JT posted about that a while ago. But there are really more ways than you think that secular society and a lack of religion can help people personally and interpersonally with their relationships to really cope with mental illness. And we're actually going to go all around the world tonight. We're going to visit California. I've got a couple anecdotes from Nairobi and Somalia and Somaliland. And we'll hear stories from some of my friends, some of your friends. And we'll also look at the sad state of psychological care in America as far as evidence goes, the use of evidence in treatment. First, I want to give a disclaimer and a trigger warning. I will be discussing, not in really, really great detail, but issues of depression, suicide, bullying, faith-healing deaths, and how mentally ill people have been treated and mistreated throughout the decades and centuries. We're going to go back to things like Roman culture and Greek culture as well. I spoke with J.T. Eberhard. Of course, you now know who he is since I mentioned him, when I was putting together my talk, and I received a few questions about why would someone like me talk about this? Because I'm not currently diagnosed. I don't suffer. I mean, everyone has their ups and downs. I have those too. I'm having a few more downs now than ups because I'm getting ready to leave the state and go off to graduate school in Boston for 6 years. So I'll be sad about leaving all my friends and family and all my infrastructure back here. But I'm doing okay. So people ask me, why would I be doing this? So I asked JT how people generally react to non-sufferers being advocates and talking about mental illness, because sometimes they can be accused of not knowing what they're talking about. And he said, quote, "You're the person we need talking about this. Imagine if one of the facets of diabetes was a malfunction in the brain that convinced you that you weren't sick. So you had, you know, a impetus to not do anything. How much worse would that be than just regular diabetes? They would absolutely need people, other people who are not sick, in order for them to live and to drive them to the doctor when they needed it. And that's exactly what we being folks with severe mental illness, that's what they have. And that's part of their lives. And they can't get by without people who are well. So that's why I'm here." JT is, of course, very public about his struggles. If you're curious, he actually did speak at Skepticon last year. I won't be showing any clips from that tonight, but he gave a very rousing and emotionally moving talk about his struggles. So you can head on over to his blog at freeflatblogs.com/wwjtd if you're curious, and you can find that there. And I also spoke with someone else that some of you might have met, Ellen Lundgren. She is the editor of Skeptic Free Thought Blog Collective and president of CFI Grand Valley State in Michigan. And she suffers from a mix of depression and anxiety, and she's also been very, very public about it in the blogosphere. But she only came to terms with it after coming out and being public about it, and that only came after talking with some close friends about it as well. So, and with further justification, I actually checked the medication that my dog is on tonight. He is on 20 milligrams of fluoxetine, which is an SSRI, per day. And he's also been in doggy therapy. He's a border collie, so I don't know if any of you have border collies kind of understand what that entails. He's a little bit obsessive, and he suffered a lot of behavioral issues when we first got him. But through treatment and therapy, he's a much, much more well-adjusted dog now. My own mother suffered from severe anxiety and depression all throughout growing up in high school and college. And also keep in mind that was a totally different era. She had no support network, no one to talk to, no one who understood what was going on. Her own mother got really mad when my mother went to a school counselor instead of her first, which is not a healthy way of helping out your daughter, which is having that kind of a problem. And someone else in my family, when I was about 13 or 14 years old, was very close to committing suicide. At the time, I didn't understand fully what that entailed because I didn't know what mental illness was. But once I turned 17 or 18, I started remembering that and thinking about it. And then it kind of struck me what exactly that meant, like the kind of struggles and strife that people go through and the problems that they face that push people to that level of struggle. And then I started thinking about becoming an advocate. So my hope is that you can all look past the fact that I don't have severe mental illness myself, and know that I've lived and talked with people who do, and especially in the past couple of weeks I've done plenty of interviews to make sure that I'm on the right track. And having spent the last several years in the secular movement, I've seen plenty of opportunities for us to specifically do more for people with mental illness, or as some people think they might be called, brain disorders, so that's exactly what they are. So let's look at some statistics. If you don't suffer yourself, you probably know someone with a mental illness. Raise your hand if you know someone with one. Exactly. So, can't see the literature. Anyway, 46.4% of the population of North America will experience some type of mental disorder across their lifespan. In any given year, 26.2% of the population will suffer from some type of mental illness. That's big. That's almost 50%. So this is not a problem that can be ignored. And half the room might have something. You might be undiagnosed. It might not manifest itself yet. Schizophrenia often doesn't manifest itself until age 21 through 23. And before then, you don't know if you're susceptible to it. That one, pretend you didn't see that. How many people in here think that women are more likely, on average, across their entire lifespans and the entire spectrum of diseases, to suffer from a mental illness than men? Raise your hand if you think that. Wait, wrong. These statistics are from the National Institute of Mental Health. See, right here. Women are no more or less likely than men to experience any disorder over their lifetime. Done. There's really no difference between the sexes. I know it's in society, and feminism is working to correct some of these perceptions, but women are perceived to be emotional or quote unquote crazy, and women are quote bipolar due to their menstrual cycles, and this is all completely nuts. It's wrong, and I'll address some of the misconceptions within the context of mental illness and mentally ill patients in a couple of slides here as well. So even if you don't have one yourself, and even if you don't know someone who suffers from a mental illness, and as we see there are very few of you like that, you can still educate yourself and become an advocate. So that in mental illness and in the language of mental illness, there's something called stigma. Not this kind. This kind. So all these words in the basket are words we're not supposed to use because they have very, very bad connotations, and they're wrong and unfounded. So how do you deal with stigma? What is that? It's just a set of ideas and labels that are attributed to people who suffer from mental illness, and it results in people who suffer being shunned, outcast, not feeling as though they're regular members of society, which they are, and they should be treated as such. But how do you deal with that? First step is to talk publicly and ask questions of people who you think might be affected, or might be affected, to get their stories and get their experiences. And just be conscious of the language that you use when referring to mental health patients. I spoke with some people, of course, as I mentioned over the past couple of weeks, and one of them was a sufferer of bipolar disorder. And he said that he cringes every single time someone, just in passing, in casual conversation during the day, says, "I'm feeling so bipolar today." As if to say, "Oh, I'm like really happy and really sad at another moment, and I don't know what's going on with me today." You have no idea what bipolar means. You have no idea. Bipolar disorder is incredibly difficult to deal with. The mood swings that are involved are very, very strong, and you can go from being, crawling across the floor physically, unable to do anything else with yourself, to being completely manic and being up 3 days straight working on whatever projects that your mind's put in front of you for hours and days on end. That's what it means. And so don't use language like that, because it kind of trivializes it and makes people who are actually suffering, and you might not know, feel pretty bad. So how does our society as a whole fare on portraying people with mental illness? Not so well. So there's 5 recurring misconceptions I'm going to address here, and they're all wrong, and they're pretty frequent, and you see them all over the place in things like film and television and so forth. You see all the time mental illness patients, pretty frequently schizophrenics. This is a big stereotype of schizophrenics. They go on violent and killing sprees as a result of their psychosis or psychotic breaks and so forth. And of course in the news, the fellow in Norway who went on the shooting spree and killed 77 people. Stuff like this does happen, but he was determined to be sane. He's not a schizophrenic, but he's going to be kind of labeled as such in Western culture, saying, "Oh, this guy's crazy, he suffers from something," and therefore people who suffer are more often to be associated with violence, which is wrong. There's this Cheryl K. Olson. She's the co-director of the Center for Mental Health and Media at MassGen, where I'm going to be this coming fall. Said in 2009, quote, "Studies have found that dangerousness in crime is the most common, theme of stories on mental illness, but research suggests that mentally ill people are more likely to be the victims than perpetrators of violence. And we actually see this pretty frequently. And according to a paper by Elbogen and Johnson in 2009 in the Archives of Gen Psychiatry, impact factor of that journal was 10.78, for those of you who know what that means. The influence of mental illness on violent behavior is confounded by things like substance abuse, alcoholism, history of violence, and demographics. So it's a terrible indicator for behavior. Second theme that we see a lot is unpredictability. People think that people with mental illness are erratic, unpredictable, they exhibit unstable behavior, and we're taught by society to look out for the next time someone snaps or goes on some type of spree and starts behaving unpredictably and dangerously, and we need to get out of their way, and we need to not be around them because we don't know when that's going to happen. That is harmful and hurtful, and they're also unfounded. Otto Wall, he's a PhD of psychology at Hartford, who says most patients are ordinary folks, and if you do, don't out yourself if you don't want to. I'm not asking to. But if you or someone you know suffers, they're a normal person. That's what mental patients are. They're a normal type of people. And they're just trying to go about their days without most people seeing their illness and seeing what they're going through. Number 3, they don't improve. That's also wrong. In the film A Beautiful Mind, which I'm sure many of you have seen, mathematician and diagnosed schizophrenic John Nash opts not to continue his medication at a later point in the film, but gains control over his hallucinations, and of course comes out the victor at the end, keeps his wife, keeps his educational, prestigious nature alive. And while many people aren't helped by medication, commonly due to not finding the right combination, or simply there isn't a medication out that would help them at that point, this portrayal really kind of trivializes medical treatment, saying, oh, it's just something you can toss away and you're fine about it. It was helping him in the film, and he tossed it away and did just perfectly fine without it, even better. That's a dangerous way of thinking, because a lot of people do benefit from medical therapy. Now I should make a disclaimer, medication needs to be paired with therapy. Without it, it's not nearly as effective, but medication alone can go some distance. Number 4, the chemical imbalance oversimplification. So we see all the time on television, you see ads advertising the newest SSRI that you should ask your doctor about because you are clearly suffering from depression. Obviously not everyone does, but a fair amount of the population does. That's also a dangerous way of thinking because you think, oh, there's this one magic pill that I can take once a day, and I'm totally fine, and I don't have to talk to anyone about it ever. The pharmaceutical companies love you when you go along with that kind of thinking because you're just buying the drugs and, you know, everything's hunky-dory. But it's more complex than that. Mental illness is also arised from, yes, neurochemical imbalances. You have incorrect levels of neurotransmitters in your brain, but also reshaping of your neural networks. Now, I'm going to be studying computational neuroscience in the fall, so I'm interested in network reshaping things in diseases. And over time, when chemical levels in your brain are changed and different thought patterns are going on, and dangerous thought patterns are going on, what does that mean on the biological level? That means the neurons are wired, incorrectly, and you need to correct the chemical imbalance, yes, with medication, but you also need to work through the incorrect pathways with therapy and to reshape and reform proper connections through working through your own mental processes that are going awry. So it's not so simple. And number 5, mentally ill teenagers are just going through a phase. How many of you have heard that before? It's bullshit. The average age of onset for any type of disease in North America is 14. So a lot of teenagers who are having problems actually have problems. that need to be addressed, and they need not to be trivialized. These people, including Ellen and my mother, of course. My mother was first realizing that there are things going on when she was in grade school. She would worry about inanimate objects trying to strangle and kill her. And until she was in her 20s, she had no idea that this was not normal. So mental illness is kind of like the new gay. Hi, Michelle Bachman. So, I live in the district right to the west of her. That's about the closest I would ever want to be. Her district suffered, again here, a suicide epidemic among teenagers in the years 2009, between 2009 and 2011. There were 9 of them, and many more attempts, and 4 or so of the 9 were outwardly gay. And even more, perceived to be gay or labeled gay. And state public health officials have even gone to the length of labeling the area a suicide contagion area. And if you look at her policies and what she advocates, she calls gay rights and public talk of homosexuality in schools an earthquake issue. Ridiculous. So there are a lot of parallels between the stigma on gays in our culture, and it's getting better, but it's not all the way there. And the stigma on mental illness patients, but again, the latter is way behind. So we're hardly even talking about mental illness in the public sphere at this point, but within the atheist and secular communities, it's started to really, really come to the forefront in the last year. So that's encouraging. And we're doing a much better job in the general public, but there's a long way to go. A lot of similar and harmful labels slapped on GLBT students during middle school and high school can, and they're pretty easily extended to students who are visibly suffering. The student who's incredibly reserved, who you think might have body issues by the way they look at themselves, and the kids who might look gaunt. They might be suffering from anorexia or bulimia or some type of eating disorder. They get characterized as outcasts, and they are not to be associated with because they're weird and outside of the norm. And you get kids killing themselves over this kind of thing. So they get misunderstood, they get shunned, and they get characterized as unstable and potentially dangerous kids that you don't want to be friends with. I have a short clip I'm going to show you. It's the trailer to the film Bully. Now, I just heard on NPR a couple of days ago, Talk of the Nation in the afternoon. They were talking about this film. They had the director of the studios, the foundation behind it, talking about it. And a mother had called in and explained that her child had suffered severe bullying and misportrayal in middle school and had taken his life. The next caller, he went on a little bit of a rant, claiming that bully culture was necessary. It teaches kids to fend for themselves, teaches them how the world works, and directly after a caller who called in and said that her son committed suicide as a result of bullying, he said that kids who succumb to this kind of pressure are weak. I was pissed. And a lot of people were, and rightfully so. So this is the trailer to the film. And Chris, do we have sound for sure?
We should. There's a control on the wall that adjusts volume. I don't know if it's... Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Ladies, we have heard that Tyler had his head shoved into a wall locker. You said he's a geek.
My concern is that you were making someone feel so uncomfortable they didn't want to be in school.
I feel kind of nervous going to school because I like learning, but I have trouble with making friends.
As I said, some kids had told him he was worthless to go hang himself. And I think he got to the point to where enough was enough.
Tonight, a tragic situation.
A Perkins boy, just 11 years old, believed to have been desperate enough to take his own life.
This is an awfully complicated and difficult issue.
Kids will be kids, boys will be boys. They're just cruel at this age.
Here, what we get is nothing's wrong. We didn't do anything. Everything's fine. They punch me, strangle me, take things from me, sit on me.
You didn't do that hard!
He's not safe on that bus.
I've been on that bus. They are just as good as gold.
My voice is not going to fall silent. I will go to my grave until a difference is made.
We reached out to parents that have lost kids, parents of kids that are being bullied all over the world, and it took off like wildfire.
All it takes is for one person to stand up.
Be the difference. Go out and find that one child, that new kid standing over there by himself. Be willing to stand up for him.
Everything starts with one and builds up. Eventually we have an army.
If we all do it together, we will change the world.
If I didn't have such a support network in middle school and grade school, I could have been that kid. I was treated very, very poorly by my peers, and I just, thank my family and friends who were actually around there for me. But kids who don't have the same kind of support network that I did, that kind of stuff happens to them. But that's in the modern era. How was it in the past? Historically in China, mentally ill patients were concealed to prevent dishonor to families because China was a typical honor culture. It's very, very bad to have that kind of person in your family visible. And they were thought to have, quote, bad fate, which would negatively affect people that this person associated with, and you could catch mental illness, just like you've heard catching the gay in our society a lot, which is ridiculous. I mean, how often have we heard that? How often have you heard that phrase? And we also heard the tired argument nowadays that gay marriage is a social slippery slope to all sorts of deteriorating behavior and a declining society. That same kind of argument has been used in the past towards mental illness patients. It would be a decline in society if they're allowed to be out and active in the public sphere. Mental illness, craziness will spread throughout the populace, and you'll see, societal decline. So what about in Greece? Historically in Greece, a mentally ill family member implies a hereditary, disabling condition in the bloodline and threatens the family's identity as an honorable and productive unit. So, confinement, concealment, hiding, shunning, and abandonment, even, to restore and preserve the family's honor of these people who needed help. How often have we heard religions shun and demonize people of sexualities outside of heteronormativity? It's everywhere in our society. And in Middle-aged Europe, mentally ill people were often physically hurt and beaten, quote, as punishment for the disturbances their behavior caused, and as a means of teaching individuals out of their illness. Speaking of teaching, in a couple of seconds, we'll get to Bachman again. So you've seen this pie chart. What will happen if gay marriage is legalized? Nothing. So the options here: Third World War, plagues, schools will begin teaching kids how to have gay sex, and the terrorists will win. So I made my own. What will happen if mental illness patients are treated like real human beings? They'll be treated like real human beings. But the things that won't happen, we won't have more schizophrenic serial killers. We won't all catch depression, and Marcus Bachman's clinics will go bankrupt. Speaking of Bachman's clinics, they're bad. Don't go there. This is an article covering some undercover investigation that was done by the gay advocate group Truth Wins Out in 2011. A member of their group signed up to go get therapy at the Bachman Clinic. There's two in the metro area, one in the southwest metro area and one in the northeast. So this member went to get counseling and was wearing a concealed video camera to observe the types of techniques and therapeutic practices that this clinic used. And what they discovered was, surprise, they're using unfounded and unsupported techniques. And fun fact, they also take government money through Medicare and Medicaid programs by accepting patients under those programs, and they're using non-scientific techniques. But I wouldn't expect anything less from someone married to Michelle Bachman. The, quote, Bachman and Associates therapists have been caught telling gay clients, or purportedly gay clients, that God designed men to be attracted to women, and with prayer and effort, you can eventually become straight. So these kind of methods are called restorative or reparative therapy, and they are denounced by, the American Psychological Association, the American Medical Association, the U.S. government, and many other independent groups say this is crock, and you shouldn't do it. Historically, aversion treatments, like shock therapy, have also been used in, quote, conversion therapy for sexual deviance. And, of course, ECT does have a legitimate application in certain mental health patients for those with things like intractable depression that doesn't respond to medication or therapy or anything. And some people do find a clinical benefit of that. But it's highly regulated. What else? The patients are sedated with muscle relaxants and so forth, so they suffer no physical bodily harm as a result of the convulsions and so forth. But sexual deviancy isn't a mental illness, period. It's normal. And it's also not sexual deviancy. So, just to point that out there. So even though there are some differences in the treatment methodologies for mental illness and non-heterosexual behavior, namely that one is a sickness and one is not, the stigmas associated with these groups of people and their treatment over the ages have been surprisingly similar, and that's kind of disappointing. This is especially so in religious settings where both states of being are considered abnormal, and both are considered to be associated with things like demons and spirits and jinns that must be cast out, often in elaborate rituals which involve the sacrificing of pigs or rams, as one story I heard. Or prayer, and this is all instead of, God forbid, understanding what's actually going on and having an understanding of the biological basis of disease. So I'm going to talk about this story. This psychiatrist was convicted recently of his crimes as a result of allegedly mishandling and inappropriately touching some of his clients. But this psychiatrist performed shock therapy as a part of aversion to cure sexual deviancy. And now he's going to go to jail, where he belongs. But this kind of thing, castration, which is chemically castrating gay men as a part of their therapy, is not new. Have you seen these charts before? 1913. Have you seen this one? This is 1935. America has a nasty and extensive history of eugenical compulsory sterilization programs, and, quote, was the first country to confidently undertake compulsory sterilization programs for the purpose of eugenics. Not Germany, it's America. The principal targets of the American program were, let's see, the mentally retarded and the mentally ill. Not a good time to be depressed or be outwardly bipolar in the United States during the first half of the 1900s. Before I talk about this, I want to make a quick distinction. Compassionate recommendation of not reproducing if you do suffer from extensive illness is a different issue. You know, recognizing people would not be fit parents would recommend that they not reproduce. Totally different from eugenical castration and eugenical sterilization. Not the same thing. So the opinion against eugenics didn't turn or start coming around in large fashion until World War II. A number of sterilization programs continued into the 60s, and the Oregon Board of Eugenics, which was actually later renamed the Board of Social Protection, very clever, existed until, guess what decade? 70s, 60s, when? It was 1983. Until it was finally disbanded. Kind of scary. And the last forcible sterilization occurred in 1981. So overall, how many Americans were affected by these programs? 65,000 or above in 33 states. Pretty bad. So some examples specifically relating to mental health patients. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of a Virginia law in 1927, which allowed for the compulsory sterilization of patients of state mental institutions. Now, you all know who Margaret Sanger is, right? Feminist and champion of the birth control movement. She advocated sterilization if birth control was unavailable. Okay, I can kind of see that. But not compulsory. And she also discouraged reproduction of people who it was believed would pass on mental disease. Or serious physical defect, but mental disease. Yeah, there's genetic loading, but we didn't totally understand what that meant. So going out and castrating people or making sure they can't reproduce, kind of a bad idea. The 1927 Fortune magazine poll found that 2/3 of respondents supported eugenical sterilization of, quote, mental defectives, and 63% supported sterilization of criminals, only 15% of both. But a significant amount of people thought this was okay. And the mental institution in Lincoln, Illinois, fed its incoming patients milk infected with tuberculosis on purpose, resulting in a 30 to 40% annual death rate. I'm disappointed. Let's talk about faith healing, because that's always fun. Faith healing is broadly defined to be any variety of spiritual intervention or religious ceremony through which people will be cured of mental illness or mental disease or demons or whatever you have, whatever you think it is. And someone I knew back in early high school actually suffered severe social anxiety, and she was an evangelical Christian. And she recounted several years ago how she had her spirits cast out of her by her pastor or priest, and then she was cured. I have no idea. But that kind of thing is not generally the proper and proven, tried and true way to go about helping people. And I might venture a guess that she was delusioned enough in her religion that she actually thought it helped her out. I didn't follow up with her, so it could have been a case where she relapsed and then needed actual medical care. But stuff like that does happen. So James Randi, he's the founder of JREF, the James Randi Educational Foundation. He debunked a famous televangelist and faith healer here in America a couple decades ago by using some simple investigative science. And we're going to take a look at that right here.
During the 1980s, I entered a world that I found filled with fantasy and rife with abuse. The world of faith healing. I developed a special interest in a television evangelist named
Peter Popoff.
God told me, he said, you smack that cancer with your fist.
At the time, Popoff was pulling in nearly $4 million a year, healing people on his miracle crusades.
You got cancer of the stomach? Are you ready for God to burn that cancer out? Here it goes in the mighty. Devil, back off. Back off, devil! Hallelujah! Hallelujah! You really believe you're healed?
Yes.
You think your cancers are gone now?
Yes, I believe that because God never lies. And He's telling His word. Praise the Lord.
I'll tell you, from now on, you're going to have a song of victory in your heart. Amen.
To his followers, Popoff seemed to have divine powers.
Alice, is it Gould? Alice Gould?
He knew their names,
Stand up, Alice.
as well as the afflictions they'd come to cure.
God is touching that thyroid condition right now. God is touching your nerves right now. God is touching your eyes. Just lift up your hands, get ready. Here it comes.
He also knew the personal details of their lives.
Your good news from Charles. Before everything is over, I'll tell you he's going to be completely delivered because of your prayers, because of your faith. Here it comes. Complete healing in Jesus' mighty name. Right now, right now, right now. Amen. It's all right to praise the Lord.
I suspected that Popoff's revelations were other than divine. The radio scanner we brought to the hall picked up a decidedly worldly source.
Hello, Petey, can you hear me? If you can't, you're in trouble.
Popoff was being prompted by his wife through a wireless earpiece.
John?
Dewey Johnson.
She'd gotten her information from prayer cards filled out by the faithful before the show began.
Don't get rid of the walker.
You want to get rid of this walker, sister? Oh, glory. How long have you been walking on that walker?
About 3 years.
3 years.
She lives at 1627 10th Street.
1627 10th Street? Is that right?
That's right. She has arthritis all over.
Burning this arthritis right out of your body. Take a few steps just to make the devil mad. Hallelujah. That's it. Just move around a little bit. There she goes. Just walk with me. Oh, glory to God. She's not going to need that walker anymore. God's just putting new strength, new health. Burning that arthritis out of her body. Just keep going.
I was able to arrange for another broadcast of the Miracle Crusade on The Tonight Show, but this time the wireless prompting was included. In 1987, Peter Popoff declared bankruptcy.
Greater is he! Greater is he!
So, James Randi got the best of him. And thankfully, because people like him are complete and utter frauds. Well, so what's the problem with including spirituality and some level of religion in therapy, in the healing process? You ignore the medical reality of disease by praying for the cancer to disappear. It leads to not accepting and not dealing with the diseases. And you can clearly see from a video like that. So clearly that kind of faith healing is dangerous, and prayer has been shown to be ineffectual at best and unhelpful at worst by making patients more anxious about appeasing the people praying for them and getting better and so forth, and they feel pressured. And that makes them worse off. And for spiritual healing practices, any healing effect comes from the psychology of just being cared for. It's totally human. You feel a little bit better if someone's tending to you and someone's just kind of checking up on you and seeing how you're doing. So we'll talk a little bit more about spiritual healing and mental illness later. But I want to take a look at Oregon first. They've had a couple of cases of faith healing deaths in the past 5 years or so. This first one here. This is a 16-year-old name was Austin Sprout of Creswell, Oregon. He was seriously ill for a week, and his parents, members of the Followers of Christ Church, he died as a result of his illness, and they were being charged for second-degree manslaughter. But this kind of thing is ridiculous. There was another case in Oregon. These parents, the name of Dale and Shannon Hickman, they had a child born 2 months premature at their home to religious midwives. And the child lived about 9 hours, and when the child was going to die, they did not call medical assistance. So, ridiculous. So let's jump to some more modern problems in America. You see groups of conservative Christians rejecting all modern medical research and killing their offspring like this. And while we might joke about these, nutters self-selecting themselves for winning Darwin Awards or something like that, this is a very real problem in a secular society which tries to be egalitarian and socially responsible. So with respect to mental illness, the mind-body dualism is really damaging. It separates diseases of the mind from diseases of the body. And mental illness comes from your brain, which is part of your body, and is not relating to anything like the spirit or an aura that can be manipulated outside of science. You don't accept mental illness as a physical disease. If you can't accept it as a physical disease, you're not going to get treated. And leads to ineffectual treatment methods using spirits, souls, auras, and total neglect of your actual health. Now, non-religious communities typically don't have this problem, and I'm going to review a little bit more about that later as to why atheist communities do it better. So we can better care for sufferers in Western settings. But now let's go around the world. So this is a book. Came out, I think, in 1999, called The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down. And it's a little bit about faith healing, but it's also about other cultures' perceptions of disease and sickness and culture clash. This is a Hmong family from Sangya-Wuli province in Laos. And their interactions with the Merced, California medical system led to the eventual coma and death of their second and most beloved daughter. She suffered from epilepsy. But in Hmong culture, there's something called shamanistic animism. And that means malevolent spirits are constantly seeking human souls, especially those of vulnerable or unloved children. And epilepsy is loosely translated as Huag Dab Peg in Hmong language. And this directly means the spirit catches you and you fall down. Epileptic attacks are seen as something divine. When a child falls down in an epileptic seizure, they are being, tripped and caught by spirits that are touching them, and this child is momentarily able to transcend and to visit the spiritual realm. So often in Hmong culture, people who grow up epileptic and who survive and live with this disease become shamans and religious healers, and they're looked up to, and it's not seen as a disease or a potentially life-threatening condition. It's considered honorable, and traditional Hmong beliefs do not allow for invasive surgery. So again, the child eventually slips into a coma and dies as a result of this mutual misunderstanding and not having a good linguistic definition of this disease in Hmong culture. So, while simultaneously acknowledging and respecting traditions of cultures like those of Hmong people, it's obvious that better understanding of these cultures and proper education about disease states and physiological conditions are needed to ensure proper health care. So a lack of access to educational resources on secular methods, it can be a real problem for immigrants from cultures with very different portrayals and perspectives on mental illness and brain disorders, and diseases like epilepsy and dementia. And it can lead to conflicts, culture clashes, and death. You all know this woman, Zion Hursti Ali. She was an outspoken critic of Islam. She grew up in Mogadishu, Somalia, and she fled in the 90s to the Netherlands and relocated specifically to the western portion of the Netherlands called Holland. And her sister, Haweya, followed her for a while. But Haweya was diagnosed in Holland with severe psychotic illness. And it might have appeared more pronounced then because of the removal of the social safety net from their family and friends and culture back in Somalia. So Haweya moved back after she had already undergone treatment and started receiving medication, and she was doing better in Holland. And she went completely off of her meds. There's, of course, no equivalent support infrastructure or medical system back in Somalia. And they actually had moved as well, that they moved from there to Nairobi, Kenya. And this is where the rest of the story takes place. And then she started following her mother's advice of, oh, let's just follow strict Islam. The Quran will give you the proper passages that you need to be healthy, and you will be just fine if you embrace Allah enough. So Haweya followed the advice of her mother. At first, Haweya seemed to be doing well in Kenya. This is a quote. We spoke on the phone every 10 days or so, and she seemed happy. She even talked about getting a job. Then in October of 1997, she became clearly ill again. On the phone, she rambled incoherently, lacing every conversation with religious ravings. She was hearing voices. That was Ayan's writing. So here we see someone who's obviously ill, had been previously treated in a medical setting, had been getting better, but subsequently redacted her own treatment and, surprise, became ill again. And Ayan writes the following, get my book out here, about the last portion of Haweya's life in Nairobi. So when I came, this is after Haweya had already passed. Ayan's traveling back to Nairobi. So when I came, Haweya was already in the ground. I just sat in the squalid little room that my mother was now living in, on a filthy street in East Lane, and listening to her stories living with Haweya for the past 6 months. I looked at the thin window bars, dented when Haweya threw herself at them, and the windows she'd smashed, still broken. Ma and Haweya had lived here in this awful place. This is where they slept, cooked, washed. It was the most depressing room imaginable. Decades of charcoal fires stained the peeling walls. Ma told me how Haweya had died. Her psychotic episodes had become much worse. Sometimes several men had to tie her down. Ma couldn't even go near her. A doctor came to give her injections, and she seemed calmer. Then one night there was a thunderstorm. Haweya was standing at the window watching the deluge. Suddenly, she said she saw Allah and lightning and ran out the door. She ran barefoot into the road in the dark, sprinting among the potholes, and when Ma screamed for help, 2 Somali men ran after to get her. When they brought Haweya back, she was bleeding from her knees and from between her legs. She died a week after her miscarriage. Had Haweya continued treatment, she would not have resumed such suffering, and likely would still be alive today alongside Ayan. But for a couple of years, Ayan said after her sister's death she was completely unable to laugh. And she said that something in her had died when her sister passed away as a result of this struggle. So here's a problem. Mental illness in Somali culture is not well defined and is actually very, very heavily stigmatized, way beyond anything you ever see in America. If you talk to some Somali people, there's upwards of 60,000 here in the Twin Cities. If you can communicate with them, if they speak English enough to talk about this stuff, and they're willing, they'll tell you about some of these things. The mental state in Somali culture is either ill or healthy. There's no continuum. So you're binned, and if you're ill, you're shunned away. Illness is often hidden from family and friends and physicians, so you don't talk about it to anyone because it brings shame. It's believed that people will never get better, so even if you do decide to seek help, you're stuck with this. It's never going to go away. So you should just try to will it away, not think about it, and ignore it. People often see traumas and stressors as Allah's will, so it's something to be thankful for and embrace. We often see that illnesses are caused by spirits or jinns in Somali culture, and depression and other illnesses are completely ignored as long as you can perform your daily functions, because that is of the utmost importance. Illnesses are blamed on the disruption of their society through the 1990s in the Civil War in Somalia, and they think that before the Civil War happened, mental illness did not exist in Somali culture. It's not intrinsic to their humanity. It arose from these political and socio-political problems that started with the Civil War. And suicide and ideation attempts are deterred because the Quran states suicide will send you to hell. It's an act that is deterred. So they're not even comfortable talking about concepts of suicide because it has such it's problematic, because if they are religious, they're going to be sent to hell for thinking about it. Language differences. There are 3 words in Somali that can sort of translate as mental illness and depression. This murug is generally defined as some kind of sadness. It can be daily, a disappointment, or it can be a tremendous, very serious depression with physical manifestations, lack of sleep, appetite, and so forth. This is typically blamed on trauma of war and American financial stress. Wali is defined as crazy, mad, and generally mentally unfit. This is blamed on extreme shock or trauma, and it's a severe depression believed to be untreatable in their culture with medical medications. So that's specifically what they believe, that you can't treat this. And hini is a very extreme form of mental illness. It's translated as mental sickness, and this is the most stigmatized concept in Somali culture. It's characterized by intense fear, nightmares, occasional violent behavior, and behavior changes. And due to believed origins of this sickness, which are spirits and so forth, medical treatment is completely shunned and rejected. It's deemed completely useless, and they only consult spiritual leaders for healing. Mental health is directly translated as kafi madhya maskaksta, and treatment is dawain. And they're still relatively new concepts in Somali culture. You wouldn't have heard of those phrases a couple of decades ago. And depression, for example, has no direct translation in the Somali language. Instead, it's described as a feeling, the feeling that a camel has when its mate dies, and that's kurug kalbijad iyo murugo jugta. So they have no direct translation of this. Very, very few Somali physicians actually train as psychiatrists because they think that medication is not necessary, so you shouldn't get training, you don't need to get training in the administration of psychiatric medications. There's only one hospital that deals with mental health in the entire country of Somalia, and it's at inadequate facilities, understaffed, and so forth. So there's also Somaliland, which is an independent, self-proclaimed sovereign state. It's not internationally recognized, but it's in the eastern portion of Somalia, and it's mostly autonomous, and the conditions here are even worse than in Somalia. So, a British trainee psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Kamran Ahmed, he visited the Hargeisa capital of Somaliland, Hargeisa mental health facility, and he here is going to speak with a faith healer and ask them what they do to help patients through spiritual intervention. It's kind of surprising what they think they can accomplish.
When you treat people
So if you can't read that, they're talking about writing in herbal chalk on a board and washing it with water and having patients drink that. Writing Quranic verses in herbal chalk.
And do you think it works? So what kind of patients do they refer to?
Jinns are cursed by evil eye, black magic.
Tell me about the hurdle bits.
So there's two methods again that they claim to use to evaluate, and they use these methods to say that their methods work. This is how they tell that it works. Number one is that patients can say, "Oh, I got better as a result of the herbal chalk water of Quranic verses that I drank." There's something in psychology called self-report bias, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of. If you are, getting that kind of intervention, you're going to feel pressured to say, "Oh, it worked. Thank you so much," and that's not really a good way of evaluating the effectiveness of this practice. And number two, recommendations to other people. So this is kind of confounded by actual medical treatment. So it's a false attribution. If they're getting both spiritual treatment and some type of medical care, it can be falsely attributed to the spiritual intervention that you're getting. Oh, it's a result of what the shaman was doing for me. Here, go to the shaman, you'll be cured. So this presented a very difficult conundrum. Faith healers are often the first people, the first line of defense to whom patients turn for help, but this is due to their close ties in religious culture in Somalia, in Somaliland. Yet, they are the least well equipped to help. In this type of situation, faith healing is performed in a completely different context than what we were talking about a little while ago with Christian Scientist types of people in America, as they maintain relatively close ties to their medical services and actually refer patients back and forth, and that's kind of encouraging. However, this is of course only beneficial if you actually have real medical services to swap people over to. If you don't, then you're just swapping between shamans or sheiks, and neither of them are going to do what these people need done for them. So a couple quick statistics. 74% of patients in that facility have been restrained with chains. This is because they have a gross lack of proper facilities for humane restraint and care and so forth. There's 80 male patients as of the making of that documentary. 35 females, 80 males, 35 females, and 3 nurses with 6 auxiliary nurses. And there are no practicing psychiatrists in all of Somaliland. None. No access to necessary medications. So it's often said that faith is the enemy of reason, and I'm inclined to agree. But in cultures where faith healers like this and medical services work in tandem, because they need just more people tending to patients, since there's not enough of one, and if you had all of faith healers, then you're not getting anywhere. When they work in tandem, it's best to kind of promote rational approaches to medicine while allowing the faith healers to kind of stick around, at least the faith healers that do have records of referring people to the medical professionals when necessary. But it's also necessary to educate patients that beyond the social interaction and the psychology of care that they receive from, these are secular methods that the spiritual healers are using. Beyond that, it doesn't do anything. Let's look at India. This is a story from NPR from 2010, so a couple years ago. In India, there's only one psychiatrist for every 400,000 people. Now, in North America and Canada, the recommended ratio is about 1 to between 5 and 10,000. One psychiatrist to every 8,000 people or so. 400,000. It's insane. So there's 37 mental institutions in all of India, but guess how many people they have? 1.2 billion. That's an incredible lack of adequate care. This story tells the tale of a woman by the name of Dama Lakshmi and her daughter Manimagali, who suffers from mental illness. Her husband actually kicked her daughter out on account of her suffering because he thought that she was possessed by evil spirits and was going to taint the household. So they moved into a temple in the Tamil Nadu region at Hanumananthapuram to seek religious care. So in India, faith healers and temple doctors are the most socially acceptable way to receive help and treatment. It's not very socially acceptable to get actual medical care. So in contrast to some of the partnerships we saw in Somalia and Somalia between actual healthcare and faith healing sheiks, psychiatrists compete directly against healers in India. So there's a pretty big battle going on, and both cost money. One takes your money and gives you legitimate care, and the other rips you off, as we'll see later in this story. Quote, social worker Porkodi goes to the temple a lot. She spends hours trying to cajole the mentally ill to visit a nearby psychiatric clinic. After she persuaded Manimagali to go, the doctor told her she was schizophrenic. But her mother didn't have the money to keep buying the antipsychotic drugs that she needed. And Porkodi goes on to say, people find it easier to say their children or themselves are affected because of evil magic, because there is so much stigma in Indian culture attached to mental illness. And in Indian culture, there's something called the bit of both theory. There's a Hindi saying, is dawa bhi chahiye, dua bhi chahiye. And that means a bit of medicine, bit of prayer. Dawa is medicine, dua is your prayers. And curiously, India's official medical establishment, of course, does not agree with this, but it's pervasive in their culture. Chris Fairborn is a professor of psychiatry at Oxford University who helps fund mental health programs in India. And he says, for those of us interested in trying to work out how to deliver mental health care to countries with very limited resources like India, we should think about what resources are already there. Good line. Let's understand what's going on already and see what kind of things that are actually beneficial that we can kind of port over to secular treatments, and what are they doing that we can emulate that's good and helpful. We don't have to approve of them or necessarily condone what they do. And he says, but we have to acknowledge their existence and try and find out what they do. Sometimes they help in providing social presence or refer people to medical help, like in Somaliland. But other times they try to charge $150 for exorcisms, like was attempted to charge for this woman and her daughter. If they are unhelpful and take money and resources from people that should be put towards actual medical care, then it should be condemned. In psychology in America, there's something called evidence-based therapy. I saw you blinking. Why do we need a term for this? Evidence-based treatment, also known as EBT, is called empirically supported treatment. This refers to the use of mental and behavioral health interventions for which systematic empirical research has provided evidence of statistically significant effectiveness. Isn't that medicine? This was my reaction. This was posted on JT's blog by Patricia Guzikowski, who is a secular therapist, about a couple months ago. And why should we have to describe this? clinicians are trained in medical administration, and there shouldn't be a term for proven methods in psychology, because you should only be using proven methods. Doctors, so the issue of homeopathy, okay? You all know it's crap. Doctors all know it's crap. It's not practiced in any kind of standardized medical facility in America. But unproven methods are practiced all over the place in psychological, not psychiatric care because that's medical degrees, but psychological care. It's all over the place in America, and it's disgusting. And so we need to educate doctors that unproven methods in spiritual and woo-based science are unproven and unfounded. And to quote JT, the entire field of psychology itself is fairly contaminated by woo, and with religious people using it as a springboard to get at people struggling at difficult points in their life. And that's kind of sick. I don't have any stats on that, but I'm guessing that it's kind of true. It's pretty easy to see how someone might get involved in psychiatric care or counseling, and for a totally legitimate reason. You want to help other people. But your religion is telling you to do so, and you're using some type of spiritual or Christian care in your therapeutic regimes. And, well, you're kind of spreading religion through therapy, and that's not okay. From a recent commenter on a post by JT, quote, secular culture, and this is ridiculous, secular culture has a lot of catching up to do in this regard. These are churches that there are churches that offer free courses on lay counseling as a Sunday school curriculum. So what you get is armies of people equipped at a very basic level to offer free religion-based counseling services in the trenches where people live and work. When it comes down to it, it isn't a paper certificate, but the effectiveness of the tools that make the impact.
Who is JT?
So JT Eberhard is the high school specialist and a pretty well-known blogger. High school specialist for the Secular Student Alliance.
Eberhard?
JT Eberhard. E-B-E-R hard. Yeah. I won't spell the last part for you. So this guy is saying free religion-based counseling does a lot of good, and this is something that you should support. A lot of Christian facilities and churches are doing this. It does more harm than good. It's kind of given under the thinly disguised veil of spreading religion and making counselors probably feel good about themselves. I would venture that most of the instructors of such classes are in no way qualified to attempt to help people who could be really, really suffering and who might be considering hurting themselves. And it's certainly getting this, the type of qualification that is necessary to allow someone to properly help people can't be accomplished, in an hour on a Sunday in a church for a couple of months. So please don't discount proper clinical and psychiatric training given through years of rigorous education. Don't be that guy. So I mentioned that homeopathy, and it's widely known to be crap. Another person I spoke with said the following. Right now, the skeptic community primarily has organized itself around minor issues like homeopathy. Compared with religion's impact on how those with mental health issues are treated, homeopathy is a laughably minor issue. Yes, mental illness is way bigger a problem than homeopathy ever will be, and no one's talking about it. Except for me right now, because I'm talking to you. Go and talk about it. This matters a whole lot more than the dilution ratio, or Avogadro's number of herbal medicines. This deals with people's lives directly, way more than homeopathy will. So lifestyle changes, looking at how you think about things in secular methods, are really where it's at. You can accomplish worthwhile progress in psychotherapy without woo or magic. This is a quote from Daryl Ray. He's the author of The God Virus, How Religion Affects Our Lives and Culture. He's a fairly well-known trainer in organizational structure and a writer. He says, many people seem to think that religion, spirituality, or superstition are important components of therapy. they are not. The spiritual therapies are based on the notion that there's a spirit in or around people or the world, and people can tap into a non-material spiritual world somehow. And he says, as a non-superstitious person, the claim just does not hold water and has no place in psychology. Another person that I interviewed went on to say that non-religious people were where I found great and potentially the greatest amounts of help. Even these slightly spiritual therapists that this person had seen incorporated Buddhism and was a more philosopher than a religious person. And this person said that while he never explicitly turned to religious people, he turned to a spiritual person who integrated Ayurvedic, which is Indian natural medicine, thoughts into psychotherapy. He said, quote, "This was useful for me, actually because it gave me an interesting and multidimensional way to look at depression and mental disorders. It had much more to do with lifestyle change in combination with medicine as a means to recovery." Lifestyle change. There's no religion in that. There's nothing spiritual about changing your lifestyle. Changing your thought patterns, your behavior patterns, how you think about yourself, how you think about how you think. Those are all secular methods. There's no religion in that. So let's say you're an atheist in America, like me. Let's say I move to Boston, I suffer a depressive breakdown, and I need help. Which is possible, you never know. So I want to find a secular therapist that for sure uses proven scientific methods and never, ever, ever uses therapies that are not supported by evidence. Here's a hint, don't go to Bachman and Associates. This is Jen McCright, another well-known blogger in the secular movement. Many of you have seen talk for us before here. She suffers from a condition called dermatillomania, which is not as serious as other conditions, but it's very, very annoying. It's it's related to trichotillomania, which is the pulling of hair. Dermatillomania is the pulling and peeling of skin, and it's a compulsion control disorder. You can't control this compulsion. And she, much to her credit, came out about it. And she went to get help at the University of Washington Seattle Counseling Services. But she decided to figure out, oh, who am I meeting? She had an appointment, and I want to find out about my counselor before I go in there to see if they are full of woo. She says, I decided to Google the name of my screener before calling. Not sure why. Maybe I thought seeing a smiling photo attached to a name would calm some of my nerves. And then this is her bio. Screener, name redacted. Has worked in the field of crisis intervention with a specialization in suicide prevention since 1993. She earned her master's degree in acupuncture from Northwest Institute of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine in 2002, and has completed her certification as a yoga instructor. What? Integrating an understanding of traditional Chinese medicine and yoga with training in mental issues. Name offers a holistic and culturally sensitive approach to crisis intervention. Name is a certified counselor in the state of Washington. She was pissed because she's not going to get the help she needs with this person. She did a little bit more digging. 5 out of 14 counselors of the clinic staff at this clinic where she was going to go to at UW mentioned using spirituality or Buddhist teachings in their therapy. So if you're someone with mental illness who wants an explicitly non-religious counselor that won't give you a bunch of whoop, Counselor Patricia Guzikowski, whose name I already mentioned, she does occasional guest posts with JT Everhard, has some advice for finding them. So, know your target. You need to know if you're going to a psychologist or psychiatrist, and this is kind of general advice for anyone who's trying to find the proper therapist. Avoid all 12-step programs. All of them. They're all based on finding a higher power and submitting yourself to them, saying you have a personal failure and you can't control it. Beware of counselors who say therapy is, quote, more of an art than a science. It's a science. It's proven. Cognitive behavior therapy and dialectical behavior therapy are proven, rigorous scientific methods of helping people deal with their problems. And if a lot of things other than that are not. So avoid people who say that kind of thing. And make sure their credentials check out. Psychiatrists, psychologists, and various types of licensed therapists in different states all have different titles and credentials. And be really picky. If someone's not working out, if therapy gives you woo-woo, you find a new therapist. Kind of like the whole life gives you lemons or God gives you lemons, you find a new God thing. Find a new therapist. Except there's no God giving you therapy. Finding evidence-based treatment is actually getting a little bit easier. Daryl Ray founded something amazing called the Therapist Project, and recovering from religion therapist project. They're currently not accepting anyone who's looking for secular therapists. They're trying to build a database up right now, but it's going to give people seeking care an opportunity to find a totally secular, usually non-religious, and probably atheist therapists who are not going to give them any non-scientific crap. This is an amazing resource. It has never been done before, and it's especially important in cultures like North America, where some level of spirituality is pretty much assumed of everyone. So what do there's a couple. I promise I'm going to be finishing up soon. But a couple reviews. What does religious care actually provide to mental health patients? You remember this study? Prayer does nothing. Yeah, Revelation to me too. 2006 was an ongoing study with more than 1,800 patients, and they did a study on it was double-blinded on whether praying helps people recover at all from undergoing heart surgery. And it was found that prayer didn't do a whole lot, and in some cases actually made people more anxious and didn't recover as fast because they were trying to get better for the people who were praying for them, who didn't want to make their gods angry. So studies have actually shown religious involvement is generally conclusive to better mental health later in life. And this is kind of interesting. Studies among adults reveal fairly consistent relationships between religiousness and depressive disorders that's negatively correlated. So higher religiosity, lower depression. Religion has been found to enhance remission in depression. And so what's behind this? Religious teaching might prevent suicide, but what's behind this? The social support networks, comfort, and meaning derived from people, and on some level, religious teachings are what's going on here. So, but barring prayer, the simple act of tending to a patient and being social with them can really go a long way. But there's nothing fantastic or magical about someone sitting next to you and asking how you're doing and checking in on you, even if that person is a sheik, a shaman, or an exorcist. When they're not going about odd and arcane rituals, their simple human presence and tending to patients can really be a big help. And in reality, what else is going on other than human contact, connection, and the associated alleviation of suffering that's derived from caregiving? And there have been studies done on this that the psychology of caregiving is really pronounced. You don't even have to give someone a placebo. It's just being tended to will improve your state of being and how you think you're doing. Ellen Lundgren, whom I mentioned earlier, reported that she would not have been able to be president of CFI on campus at Grand Valley State in Michigan if it wasn't for her medication and for simply having people to talk to, having human contact. In cultures where primary and evidence-based medical care is scarce or non-existent, Somalia, India, the care of religious leaders can really be important in keeping patients connected to their clans, to their societies and people in their community. But do you see something metaphysical in such a simple relationship? I don't. So is there anything statistically significant and helpful that religious care provides through methods not pirated from secular methodology? Probably not. Another quote from Daryl Ray. A good psychotherapist does their work with excellent technique, none of which was ever developed by Jesus, a priest, a minister, or a bishop. If religion was an important key to mental health, then religion would have solved the problem of mental health 2,000 years ago. Jesus' approach to mental illness was to cast demons out of a mentally ill person into a herd of swine and have the swine jump over a cliff. That was the state of mental health knowledge until secular physiological science came up along 150 years ago. So it provides what? Not recognizing physical illness, invading and permeating the American psychology system of woo, removing personal responsibility, demons, gods, all this crap. What do we do about it? Science! From my mother, who is a nurse and also a mental health patient herself. Basing diagnosis and treatment on scientific research without any influence from a religious stance that might prevent somebody from getting the treatment they need or accepting that it's okay to have this illness. That's what's important. We can advocate proven medicine in secular society. We can remove the stigma. This is from JT. You remove God from the equation, and we don't ask, quote, why did God did this? We ask, what biological reason is behind this? We pay very close attention to language in the atheist movement and culture. Typically socially conscious of stereotypes, stigmas, things around feminism, women's rights, and so forth. Even talking about ourselves, there's so many damn labels for ourselves. We're very conscious of language. We've already done a good job of advocating and supporting GLBT people, and we're still working on the whole feminism and sexism thing, but we're getting better. And non-religious groups are often comprised of people turning to one another for relief from religious privilege. This creates an environment of open discussion and trust. If we don't address mental illness, if we don't make ourselves and our communities a safe space for people with mental illness, where are they going to go? Especially people who are secular and they want to go a place where they're going to be accepted. Where are they going to go? This is a personal anecdote from the bipolar patient I spoke with. Quote, my non-religion has helped me a lot in my road to recovery. I feel that if I were more religious, I would not actually want to deal with my emotional problems, but I would rather want to mask my issues, just like I do with unhealthy methods of coping. So, not to pray to something, this, what religion would say, you want to pray to something, not just to pray to something, not just to hope for things to get better, I have to act, and religion would make it easier to sit back and not act. This is what you do. You speak up, you start talking. So going forward, inside and outside the atheist community, let's take charge of the language. Let's bring it out in the open. And let's embrace everyone that either does or doesn't have mental illness, but make it a welcoming environment. We have a lot to offer mental health patients. Scientific understanding, openness, a community that is already kind of in solidarity with mental health patients because we've been shunned by the Catholics and Christians and Islamists and Jews and not so much Jews, but you get the picture. Cultural divides that need to be bridged with communication too. Mental illnesses exist in all cultures, but a lot of cultures that we saw do not have adequate definitions for them. They don't know how to talk about it. We have a language that properly addresses it, but we need to bridge gaps and communicate with them and not try to shun them for not understanding. So it needs to be treated as part of the human condition, not as some metaphysical ailment that is treated by pig slaughters. So if religion truly trumps atheism in the consolation and comfort of mental illness patients, like a few studies have shown, I claim it is only through external consolation and the deportation of control and personal influence. In accepting our depressions, our anxieties, and our personality disorders as physical ailments of the brain, we're rejecting the religiously enforced idea that there is something woo and metaphysical about our minds that we can't touch, that there is an impassable gap between our bodies and the roots of mental illness. In discussing mental illness and coping mechanisms in our communities, in the secular movement, we're creating a safe space for effective individuals, of which I'm sure many of you are. We're creating a safe space for them outside of organized religions. And in opening up our communities and our compassion to these individuals, to closeted sufferers, people stuck and they can't come out even to their families of mental illness, atheists can protect and advocate for yet another block of misunderstood, misinterpreted, and mislabeled people. Thank you.